Professor Taewon checked his blue ceremonial robes one more time, making sure every fold lay perfect against his scaled skin. The welcoming hall of the Galactic War College gleamed with polished stone and ancient battle symbols from 100 worlds. This was a big day for the college. The first human instructor would arrive any moment. "Are all preparations complete?" he asked his assistant. "Yes, Professor. The atmospheric settings have been adjusted to Earth standards." Taewon nodded. His species, the Nuri, had evolved in ocean depths before becoming land dwellers. They understood the importance of proper environmental conditions. But humans came from a planet that other species called a death world, a place of extreme weather, dangerous wildlife, and constant natural disasters. What kind of warriors did such a place produce? A soft chime announced the arrival transport. The doors slid open. Captain Ji-yoon walked through the atmospheric barrier with an easy stride. She was smaller than Taewon expected. Her body lacked obvious defensive features, no scales, no claws, no protective exoskeleton. She had only soft skin and delicate limbs. Yet something in her steady gaze made Taewon's instincts tingle with caution. "Welcome to the Galactic Educational Coalition's premier tactical institution," Taewon said, his translator device converting his clicking speech to standard galactic. Ji-yoon smiled, revealing flat teeth unsuited for combat. "Thanks for having me. Earth is honored to finally join the exchange program." Taewon led her through the grand halls, explaining the college's history. The institution had trained military leaders for over 3,000 years. The walls displayed famous battle formations and honored great tacticians from member species. "Your quarters have been prepared to Earth specifications," Taewon explained. "We hope they will be comfortable." "I'm sure they will be fine," Ji-yoon replied. Humans adapt easily. That evening, the college held a formal reception for the new instructor. Academic leaders from 12 species gathered in the ceremonial hall. They wore their distinctive cultural garments and sampled foods from across the galaxy. Ji-yoon moved easily through the crowd. She tried unusual foods without hesitation and showed interest in each species' customs. Taewon watched with approval. Perhaps humans would integrate well, despite coming from such a harsh world. Then the conversation turned to military history. "How many major conflicts has your species experienced?" asked Professor Ji-ho, a tall, thin being with translucent skin. "Oh, countless regional conflicts," Ji-yoon said, biting into a blue fruit. "Before unified government, we had 2 planet-wide wars within 3 decades. The second one killed about 3% of our global population." The gathered academics fell silent. Taewon felt his gill flaps pulse rapidly in distress. Most coalition species had perhaps 1 or 2 continental wars in their entire evolutionary history. The idea of global warfare repeatedly in such a short time was shocking. "You speak of such devastation so casually," whispered Bomsuk, the insectoid head of psychological studies. His antennae trembled. Ji-yoon looked puzzled. "It's just history. How else would I discuss it?" "With appropriate gravity," said another professor. "Such loss of life is a serious matter." "Of course it's serious," Ji-yoon replied. "But dwelling on horror doesn't help us learn from past mistakes. We study war to prevent future ones, right?" Taewon noted the uncomfortable shifting of his colleagues. The humans' direct approach challenged their cultural norms. Yet he also saw students at the edges of the room leaning forward, captivated by this strange new perspective. "Perhaps," Taewon suggested, "you could tell us what humans learned from these conflicts?" Ji-yoon nodded. The biggest lesson was that traditional warfare becomes unwinnable when both sides have weapons of mass destruction. It forced us to develop more subtle approaches. "Such as?" Bomsuk asked. "Asymmetric warfare. Psychological operations. Cyber tactics. Economic pressure points." She listed these concepts as casually as menu items. "Sometimes the best way to win a war is to make your enemy unwilling to fight it." Several professors excused themselves from the conversation. Taewon remained, fascinated despite his discomfort. Your first lecture is scheduled for tomorrow, he reminded her. What topic have you chosen? Ji-yoon smiled. The ethics of deception in warfare. I thought we'd start with something everyone could relate to. As the reception ended, Taewon watched Ji-yoon chatting with curious students. He felt both concern and interest growing inside him. The human approach to warfare seemed alarmingly pragmatic. Yet there was wisdom in her words too. Perhaps this exchange program would benefit the college more than he had expected. Or perhaps it would challenge their most fundamental beliefs about how war should be taught. Either way, tomorrow's lecture promised to be unlike any in the college's long history. The lecture hall filled quickly that morning. Students from 12 different species packed the tiered seats, many arriving early to secure spots near the front. Some even stood along the walls, their varied anatomies, tentacles, wings, exoskeletons, creating a colorful display of galactic diversity. All eyes focused on the small human figure organizing her materials at the presentation podium. Captain Ji-yoon wore her formal Earth military uniform today. The dark blue fabric with silver accents looked plain compared to the elaborate academic robes of her alien colleagues, but it carried its own authority. She had chosen this outfit deliberately. Today's lesson would challenge her audience. Professor Taewon sat in the observers section with several other faculty members. His blue scales shimmered with nervous energy. Yesterday's reception had already caused ripples of concern among the teaching staff. Welcome to Applied Tactical Theory, Ji-yoon began, her voice carrying throughout the hall. Today we discuss asymmetric warfare. The holographic display behind her activated, showing a simple definition: asymmetric warfare, conflict between forces with significantly different military capabilities or methods of war. In asymmetric warfare, you use the enemy's strengths against them, Ji-yoon explained to the silent lecture hall. When one side has overwhelming conventional power, the weaker side must find unconventional advantages. She tapped her control pad, and the hologram changed to show historical footage from Earth. Small groups of fighters hiding in dense forests. Nighttime ambushes. Simple but deadly traps hidden along roads. When outgunned, humans historically poisoned water supplies, booby-trapped civilian structures, and engaged in night raids to demoralize superior forces, she continued, pointing to various examples. These tactics allow a smaller force to wear down a larger one through attrition rather than direct confrontation. The footage showed human fighters disappearing into mountain caves after attacking a military convoy. A low murmur spread through the audience. Professor Han Bail, an insectoid academic with shimmering green antennae, raised one of his forearms. Yes, Professor? Ji-yoon acknowledged. But these tactics violate at least 7 principles of honorable combat in the Coalition Charter. Han Bail's antennae twitched violently. Section 3 specifically prohibits targeting supply chains intended for civilian use. Section 12 requires all combatants to be clearly identified. Ji-yoon paused, genuinely confused. She looked at the agitated professor, then scanned the room. Many students nodded in agreement with Han Bail. Honor doesn't keep your species alive when faced with extinction, she finally replied. Survival does. The lecture hall erupted with questions and comments. But warfare has rules, called out a crystalline being near the front. Is there no concept of military honor among humans? Asked another. Ji-yoon held up her hands. Please, one at a time. Yes, humans have rules of war too. But our history taught us that those rules change when survival is at stake. She displayed new images: Earth cities destroyed by bombing, vast battlefields covered with fallen soldiers. These are from our Second World War. Conventional tactics led to massive casualties. Both sides eventually adopted whatever methods worked, ethical or not. This hard lesson is written into our military doctrine. For the next hour, Ji-yoon fielded increasingly uncomfortable questions. She explained how weaker forces throughout human history had used terrain, weather, psychological warfare, and surprise to defeat technologically superior enemies. She described sabotage operations and resistance movements without a hint of moral judgment, treating them as simply tactical choices. When the lecture ended, students lingered, forming excited discussion groups. Many approached Ji-yoon with further questions. Despite their obvious discomfort with the material, their curiosity was unmistakable. Meanwhile, Taewon hurried from the hall. He needed to act quickly. Within an hour, he had called an emergency faculty meeting. 12 professors gathered in the circular meeting chamber, their agitation visible in various species-specific ways: fluttering membranes, bristling fur, pulsing light patterns. "Her methods are barbaric," insisted Do-yoon, the ethics instructor, his furred snout quivering with indignation. "She speaks of targeting water supplies, of hidden explosives in civilian areas. This violates everything we teach about civilized conflict. The coalition established clear protocols for warfare precisely to prevent such brutality," added Han Baiyul. "If we teach these methods, we undermine millennia of progress." Taewon listened carefully before responding. "I share your concerns. However, we must remember the purpose of this exchange program: to learn from different perspectives." "But undeniably effective," countered Bomsuk, his insectoid features unreadable. "And the students are fascinated. Perhaps there is wisdom in understanding these approaches, even if we choose not to employ them." The academic administrator entered with a concerned expression. "We have a situation. Enrollment requests for Captain Ji-yoon's class have overwhelmed our academic system. Nearly every student in the college has requested transfer to her lectures." Silence fell over the faculty. "This is worse than I feared," whispered Do-yoon. "The students are being seduced by these brutal but effective tactics." Taewon's gill flaps pulsed slowly as he considered the situation. "Perhaps," he suggested carefully, "what fascinates them is not the brutality, but the survival instinct these tactics represent. Our species evolved in relatively stable environments. Humans did not. We must understand this difference." The meeting continued for hours without resolution. Outside, students excitedly discussed new tactical concepts that challenged everything they had been taught about honorable warfare. The Great Hall of the Galactic War College buzzed with excitement. Colorful banners representing different planetary systems hung from the high ceiling. Students dressed in their formal academic uniforms moved between preparation stations, checking tactical displays and studying maps. Today marked the beginning of the annual crisis simulation, the most important training exercise of the academic year. The college administration had divided students into mixed species teams, each assigned to resolve a detailed regional conflict scenario. "Remember," announced Dean Kwanho, his voice echoing through the hall, "this simulation tests your ability to apply theoretical knowledge to practical situations. Your performance will constitute 40% of your final evaluation." 6 scenarios had been carefully crafted by the faculty. Each team would command virtual forces in a different simulated conflict, with faculty members observing and scoring their decisions. Captain Ji-yoon stood with her assigned team near Simulation Pod 3. After weeks of controversy surrounding her teaching methods, she had been allowed to serve as a team advisor, a compromise position that satisfied neither her supporters nor her critics. "The situation parameters have been uploaded," she told her 8 team members, who represented 6 different species. "We have 3 hours to develop our initial strategy before the simulation begins." The student team leader, Yoonji-I, a tall amphibious being with silver-blue skin, nodded respectfully. "We are honored to have your guidance, Captain." As they gathered around the tactical display, Ji-yoon noticed faculty observers positioning themselves nearby. Professor Taewon and Professor Han Baiyul made no attempt to hide their scrutiny of her team. "Let's examine the scenario," Ji-yoon suggested, ignoring the observers. The display showed a regional conflict on a border planet. 2 factions were fighting for control of resource-rich territory. One faction had superior technology but fewer numbers. The other had greater numbers but more primitive weapons. Both claimed legitimate historical rights to the contested areas. "Standard approach would be to secure these 7 locations," said Yoonji-I, highlighting several points on the map. "They represent significant cultural and historical landmarks that both sides value." Ji-yoon studied the map carefully. Why would controlling those points lead to victory? The students exchanged confused glances. "They are prestige targets," explained Sunmi, a small avian student with brilliant green feathers. According to coalition doctrine, holding such locations gives moral authority and bargaining power. Ji-yoon pointed to different locations on the map. What about these areas? The water processing facilities, communication hubs, food storage centers? Those are civilian infrastructure, replied another student. Not primary military targets. Focus on actual strategic value, Ji-yoon instructed them. What damages your opponent's ability to continue fighting? A military force needs supplies, communication, and morale to function. Target those elements, not symbolic locations. The students looked uncomfortable but intrigued. Slowly, they began developing a strategy that prioritized control of key resources rather than culturally significant sites. When the simulation began, Ji-yoon's team immediately broke convention. They bypassed the contested historical monuments and ceremonial outposts that other teams rushed to secure. Instead, they positioned their forces to control water resources, communication networks, and supply routes. Faculty observers watched with growing alarm. They're ignoring all traditional engagement protocols, Han Baiyal muttered, his antennae twitching rapidly. Taewon said nothing, but his gill flaps pulsed with concern as he watched the simulation unfold. The crisis reached its peak on day 3 of the simulation. Ji-yoon's team faced a difficult decision. The opposing force had concentrated its strength around a ceremonial basin and ancient lake that both factions considered spiritually significant. According to the simulation parameters, whoever controlled this site would gain substantial support from local populations. We should challenge them directly for control of the basin, suggested Yoon-ji. It's the expected move. Ji-yoon studied the tactical display. What's the terrain like upstream from the basin? There's a dam system controlling water flow, answered Sunmi. And if we opened all floodgates simultaneously? The students ran calculations. The basin would flood completely, said Yoon-ji. The enemy position would become indefensible. But the cultural site would be damaged, added Sunmi quietly. Ji-yoon looked at her team. You must decide. Which matters more, preserving the site or achieving victory with minimal casualties? After intense debate, the team made their decision. They sent a small force to take control of the dam system while creating diversionary attacks elsewhere. Then they opened the floodgates. In the observation room, faculty members watched in horror as water surged through the simulated landscape, forcing enemy troops to abandon their positions. This is not how war is conducted in civilized space, protested Han Baiyal, his voice rising. They've deliberately targeted a sacred cultural site. But the strategy worked perfectly. With their position flooded, the opposing force retreated in disarray. Ji-yoon's team quickly secured key communication nodes during the confusion, effectively cutting off command coordination. Within hours, the opposition surrendered. When the simulation ended, Ji-yoon's team had achieved victory with the lowest simulated casualty count in the college's history. Not a single civilian death occurred in their scenario, and military casualties were minimal on both sides. During the debriefing session, Ji-yoon faced harsh questioning from faculty reviewers. You deliberately sacrificed a protected cultural site, Han Baiyal accused. Such actions violate Section 5 of the Coalition Rules of Engagement. Sometimes preservation of life requires abandoning traditional concepts of what's sacred, Ji-yoon explained calmly. Humans learned this through bitter experience. We found that prioritizing symbolic targets often prolongs conflicts and increases casualties. From his seat in the back of the room, Taewon watched the human with growing uncertainty. Each day brought new perspectives that challenged thousands of years of coalition military doctrine. Were these the perspectives of monsters or pragmatists? He couldn't decide. But he couldn't deny their effectiveness either. The grand ceremonial hall of the Galactic War College gleamed with decoration. Light crystals cast rainbow patterns across the audience. Hundreds of graduates in formal academic robes sat in rows, their diverse anatomies creating a colorful display. Some had scales that shimmered, others had feathers or fur, and a few glowed with internal bioluminescence. Professor Taewon stood at the podium, delivering the graduation address. His blue scales had been polished to a high shine for the occasion, and his ceremonial robes bore the symbols of his distinguished academic career. For 3,000 years, this institution has prepared the finest tactical minds in the galaxy, he declared. Today, you join those ranks. You carry forward our traditions of honorable combat and principled defense. In the front row sat Captain Ji-un, representing Earth in the faculty section. Though she had faced considerable controversy during her teaching term, protocol demanded her presence at graduation. She smiled politely as Tae-won spoke of coalition values and honorable warfare. The ceremony continued with awards presentations. Students from 12 species received recognition for academic excellence. Music played as each graduate's name was announced. Parents and family members watched proudly from the visitor section. Then the emergency alert sounded. A harsh tone cut through the music. Red lights flashed along the walls. The holographic display behind Tae-won changed from ceremonial images to a tactical map of coalition space. Dean Kwan-ho hurried to the podium. He whispered urgently to Tae-won, whose gill flaps flared with alarm. The ceremony is suspended, Tae-won announced. All military personnel report to your assigned stations. Faculty will gather in the Strategic Command Center immediately. Confusion swept through the hall. Graduates and guests looked at each other with concern. Security officers appeared at the doors, directing people to emergency gathering areas. In the command center, faculty members crowded around display screens. The tactical map showed coalition border territories flashing with warning indicators. What's happening? Asked Professor Han Baiyel, his antennae twitching nervously. Admiral Dong Hyuk, the military liaison to the college, brought up detailed reports. An unknown species has begun aggressive expansion into coalition space. They've already overwhelmed 3 defense outposts. Have we attempted communication? Asked Professor Baum-suk. Yes. We sent standard greeting protocols and formal declarations of territorial boundaries, replied the admiral. They responded by destroying the communication vessels. Tae-won studied the attack patterns. What defense strategies have been implemented? Coalition forces have responded with traditional engagement protocols, said the admiral. Formal declarations, honor-bound combat restrictions, and symbolic positioning as established in the defense charter. New alerts flashed across the display. Another outpost had fallen. They're being systematically destroyed, muttered Tae-won. Our traditional approaches aren't working. For 3 days, the command center operated continuously. Faculty members observed, analyzed, and advised as coalition forces attempted to contain the threat. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Coalition ships formed ceremonial defense formations, transmitted formal challenge declarations, and were swiftly overcome by the aggressive and unpredictable enemy tactics. After the third major defeat, Tae-won left the command center. He walked slowly through the quiet halls of the college, deep in thought. Traditional tactics had failed. The coalition needed something different, something that perhaps only an outsider could provide. He stopped outside Captain Ji-un's quarters and pressed the entry request button. Ji-un opened the door, unsurprised to see him. Professor Tae-won. I've been following the reports. Her quarters were spartanly furnished, with tactical displays showing the same battle information available in the command center. She had been analyzing the situation independently. Tae-won hesitated before speaking. This request went against everything he had believed about proper warfare. We need alternative perspectives, he finally admitted. Ji-un nodded and invited him inside. She brought up detailed tactical displays showing enemy movement patterns. The problem is simple, she said, pointing to the data. Your forces are predictable. You announce your intentions, form recognizable patterns, and follow expected protocols. This enemy studies your responses and counters them systematically. What would humans do differently? Tae-won asked quietly. You need to introduce chaos while maintaining your ethical boundaries, Ji-un explained. She began sketching a new strategy on her display. Unpredictability is your greatest weapon now. For hours, they worked together. Ji-yoon outlined an unconventional approach that nonetheless respected coalition ethical restrictions. Tactical retreats to draw enemies into prepared zones, communication disruption rather than direct attacks, and psychological operations to reduce enemy morale. We create the illusion of typical coalition responses, but then do something unexpected, she explained. We make them waste resources preparing for attacks that never come. We appear weak in areas where we're strong. Taewon studied the plans with growing interest. The strategy maintained coalition principles while incorporating human unpredictability. No poison water supplies, he asked cautiously, remembering her earlier lectures. Ji-yoon smiled. I'm suggesting approaches your species can actually implement without moral collapse. Humans can go further, but you don't need to. She showed him simulation results. These tactics will work against this enemy. They expect you to follow your traditional playbook. When you don't, they'll make mistakes. Taewon's gill flaps pulsed with renewed hope. I must present this to the Coalition Defense Council immediately. Do you think they'll accept strategies from a Deathworlder? Ji-yoon asked. They may not like it, Taewon replied, gathering the tactical plans, but they like losing even less. As he left her quarters, Taewon realized how profoundly his perspective had changed since Ji-yoon's arrival. What once seemed barbaric now appeared practical. Perhaps there was wisdom in the human approach after all, a wisdom born from surviving on a world that never allowed complacency. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Defense Headquarters sparkled with light from 1,000 floating crystals. Officials from every coalition species gathered to celebrate their victory over the mysterious aggressors who had threatened their borders. After 3 tense cycles of conflict, peace had returned. Admiral Dong-hyuk stood before the assembled crowd, his ceremonial armor gleaming. Today we honor the courage of our forces and the wisdom of our strategists, he announced. Through unexpected tactics and careful planning, we have secured our territories with minimal loss of life on both sides. The crowd applauded politely. Most knew that traditional coalition tactics had failed. Only the adoption of human-inspired strategies had turned the tide of battle. This knowledge created mixed feelings among many present. Captain Ji-yoon stood quietly at the edge of the celebration. She wore her formal Earth uniform rather than coalition ceremonial dress. She sipped a blue drink and watched the proceedings with a thoughtful expression. Professor Taewon noticed her standing alone. He made his way through the crowd, stopping occasionally to accept congratulations from colleagues. When he reached Ji-yoon, he offered a traditional Nuri greeting gesture. The coalition has formally acknowledged your contribution to our victory, he said. Though some still struggle to accept the methods. Ji-yoon smiled slightly. I noticed they described the tactics as innovative rather than human-inspired in the official announcement. Politics, Taewon admitted. Change comes slowly to species with 1,000-year lifespans. They stood in companionable silence, watching dignitaries from 12 worlds mingle and celebrate. In one corner, Professor Han Bayel engaged in animated discussion with military officials, his antennae moving rapidly as he spoke. He's arguing for more traditional approaches in future conflicts, Taewon explained. But even he cannot deny the results. Your approach saved countless lives. Ji-yoon shrugged. Earth shaped us. When your planet actively tries to kill you for millions of years, you develop different perspectives on survival. What you see as shocking, we see as necessary adaptation. Taewon's gill flaps pulsed with understanding. I've been studying Earth's environment since we met. Your world has more natural disasters in a decade than most coalition homeworlds experience in a century. Your weather alone would kill most of my species. We evolved running from predators and huddling in caves during storms, Ji-yoon said. Security was never guaranteed. We had to create it ourselves, again and again. A young Nuri officer approached them, looking nervous. He bowed deeply to Ji-yoon. Captain, I served in the 3rd Defensive Squadron, he said. Your strategies saved my entire unit. We were prepared to die honorably, but instead, we live. Thank you. After the officer left, Taewon noticed Ji-yoon's eyes looked wet. Are you unwell? He asked with concern. Happy tears, she explained. A human reaction sometimes. That's why I do this work, not for glory or honor, but to save lives. I believe I finally understand, Taewon said quietly. 3 months later, the Academic Council of the Galactic War College met to review curriculum changes. Professor Taewon presented the proposal he had developed with input from Captain Ji-yoon. While maintaining our ethical foundations, he explained to the assembled academics, we must incorporate pragmatic approaches from various evolutionary perspectives. The recent conflict proved that traditional tactics alone cannot address all threats. Professor Han Baiyal raised objections, as expected. We cannot abandon thousands of years of honorable combat traditions. Not abandon, Taewon countered. Expand. Honor and effectiveness need not be enemies. After heated debate, the council approved the reforms. The following semester brought new courses in adaptive tactics, environmental response strategies, and psychological warfare ethics. As more human instructors arrived at the college, they were joined by representatives from other harsh planets, species who had evolved in extreme environments similar to Earth. Each brought unique survival perspectives shaped by their homeworlds. Students flocked to these new courses. Many traditional professors were surprised to find that blending approaches often created more ethical outcomes than rigid adherence to convention. Simulated casualty rates dropped across all crisis scenarios. Captain Ji-yoon completed her teaching assignment and prepared to return to Earth. On her final day, she found a small package in her quarters. Inside was a traditional Nuri water crystal, a rare gift representing deep respect. The attached note from Taewon read, "You taught us that different paths can lead to the same worthy goal, the preservation of life." 5 years passed. The Galactic War College continued to evolve, incorporating insights from worlds across the spectrum of environmental conditions. The Coalition Defense Forces adopted flexible response protocols that maintained ethical standards while allowing for tactical adaptation. When Professor Taewon was appointed Chancellor of the college, his installation ceremony drew attendees from across Coalition space. Captain Ji-yoon, now promoted to Admiral, returned to represent Earth at the ceremony. Taewon's first official act was to establish a permanent Deathworlder Advisory Council, a formal recognition that harsh world species offered essential perspectives on survival and security. Different evolutionary paths create different wisdoms, he announced to thunderous applause. And we need all available wisdom to face the universe together. After the ceremony, he found Ji-yoon in the garden where they had first discussed Earth's unusual history. When you arrived, I thought humans might be monsters, he admitted. Now I understand you were simply pragmatists shaped by necessity. Ji-yoon smiled. The universe is vast and dangerous. The species that survive are those willing to learn from each other. Together they watched students from 20 worlds practicing new tactical formations, a perfect blend of Coalition honor and Deathworlder practicality.